when I was in my car. Yeah.
I mean,
She said she just started backing up slowly, and then somebody came up behind her, in your line, their horn, and then they realized, oh my God.
so, yeah.
I call to order today the December 2023 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone, and our goal is to make finance fun today. Thank you to those who are joining us by way of live stream and video, and those attending in our boardroom or on Zoom. So, first of all, I'd like to welcome our student representatives for today, Cole Groshon from the Duluth campus and Hal Johnson from the Morris campus. With that, let's turn to our agenda. Our first item this afternoon is to act on the proposed financial plan for the academic affiliation agreement between the university and CentraCare Health. The proposed financial plan was reviewed by the board at the November 2nd special meeting. I would like to welcome Interim President Ettinger, Senior Associate Dean of the Medical School, and University of Minnesota Physicians Financial Officer Bill Siebert, and Associate Vice President Volna. Interim President Ettinger, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. At the October meeting, the board approved the academic affiliation agreement with CentraCare, which establishes a medical school campus in St. Cloud that will eventually enroll and train up to 96 medical students. It will be the state's first new medical school campus in some 50 years. This agreement aligns with the university's mission by addressing the workforce needs for medical professionals in rural Minnesota and beyond. In November, at a special board meeting, you reviewed the financial plan for the affiliation agreement, and now you will consider approval of the financial plan. The financial plan is well thought out. It uses conservative estimates and prudently manages risks. Furthermore, CentraCare's financial commitments to the partnerships are backed by their strong financial position. I recommend approval of the financial plan to move this program forward, and I'd like to invite Bill Siebert to make a few brief remarks. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I don't have much more to say. I'm the interim president. Pretty much summarize where we are for the financial plan. I can go through the slides if that is what you'd like to do, be able to provide us with that information to support what he's already said.
Do you guys need to go through the slides or from last month, or no? Are you okay with just going to the discussion? Well, let's go to the discussion. I don't see any head seating. We need to talk about it more. So before I turn to discussion, though, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the financial plan for the academic affiliation agreement?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing no discussion. You appear ready to vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The motion passes. It's now approved. So, thank you.
That was fun. Very good. Fun.
Finance is finance.
Finance is fun.
Finance and finance.
Okay, I'm blowing it right now, so I'm just going to move on. Okay. Our next item is to review an amendment to the university's supplemental fiscal year 2025 state budget request. Interim President Ettinger and Senior Vice President Franz will outline the amendment as it stands today. Interim President Ettinger, would you like to start?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. I appreciate the board's willingness to consider an amendment to our supplemental state budget request at this time. As our conversations continue to evolve regarding the future of academic health, our vision advances the university's long history of education, discovery, and innovation, and commitment to service of all Minnesotans. In this spirit, we are seeking alignment with the public interest of the state of Minnesota and their financial support to optimize health sciences at the university. These funds would be used for ongoing support of academic medicine's role in improving access and equity in healthcare and the university's mission of training, research, and clinical care. We appreciate your engagement and your understanding that as these conversations continue over the coming months, What we bring you for approval in February may look slightly different. But with that, I'd like to have Senior Vice President Myron Franz dive further into the details.
Thank you, Interim President Ettinger and Chair Hips. As a point of reference, the task force, as you know, on the academic health at the University of Minnesota has been meeting on a regular basis, and we met yesterday. There'll be another meeting on December the 20th and one on January the 10th, and the report of the task force is due on January 15th. Yesterday, we had the opportunity to present our plan for the university's vision for academic health in Minnesota to the governor's task force. The vision and plan are intended to lay out what we believe is an essential component of what Minnesota's future needs to be in order to build a commitment to a true academic health system centered at the University of Minnesota for the state of Minnesota. Given the charge of the task force, they are charged to create the recommendations to the governor and to the legislature. The university wanted to provide our ideas and plans from which the task force can draw their own conclusions. We obviously have some ideas what conclusions they should draw, but it's certainly their prerogative to make those recommendations. The vision that we presented really builds on, as Interim President Ettinger said, the aspirations for an academic health at the university, and we shared that last January. And the key element of that plan for purposes of the Board of Regents review today is a component requesting $60 to $80 million in state funding beginning in 2025, fiscal year 2025. This funding would be above and beyond what we are currently receiving from Fairview in terms of their academic support payments. These payments would be used to address immediate needs in the healthcare sector and begin to plan for the next generation of Minnesota's expertise in health. The investment directly impacts our ability to provide more of what we are told the state needs: primary care physicians, other care providers who are driving innovation, offering complex care, and training the next generation of providers. We've added this funding request to the supplemental request that you approved in October, and as the President mentioned, we will come to you in February for approval, but in light of what the task force may recommend between now and January 15th, then we may have additional feedback and additional changes or requests as part of this request today. Thank you.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. Okay, that was a review item, and we'll bring it up again in February. So. Discussion. Yeah, does anyone have any discussion on it? Yes.
Yeah, well, thank you for bringing it forward, and just learned about the figures yesterday. I'm a member of the task force myself, and I really hope between now and February, in order to, I certainly want to support academic health, and boy, does the state rely upon it, as the task force has seen over and over again. That said, I really want to know, what this funding will go towards, and have a further breakdown of what the funding is for and what outcomes we expect to get out of it. I think the legislature is asking us appropriately about accountability as well. So I would imagine that between now and February, we'd expect kind of a line item budgeting that goes in accordance with that, have a more specific dollar than the range that's there, and have what outcomes we would intend to achieve by those investments.
Yes, very good point. Thank
I'll
you.
second that. Can I second that?
Regent Turner, did you?
Oh, I second that because
Okay.
from what I've observed through the years, they want to know how every dollar is spent.
I agree. Any further discussion? Okay, stay tuned. So the next item, the committee will hear an update on the progress of the Peak Initiative. Senior Vice President Franz and Vice President Horstman will provide the update.
Thank you, Chair Hips, and thank you, members of the board and President Ettinger. I'm here with my partner in this endeavor, Vice President Horstman. We want to thank you for the support and the opportunity to talk to you more about this important initiative. And recently, there's been a lot of work completed, and Vice President Horstman will give you an update on what's happening literally within the last several days. But today's discussion is really going to focus, as you can see from the agenda, on the different learnings and preparation for the future phases. We want to talk about an overview of our organizational changes that demonstrate the Phase 1 implementation progress. We want to talk about the summary of changes and metrics that we're developing that are associated with Phase 1 implementation milestones. There's some early outcomes of Phase 1 go live that we want to talk about. We want to get into some information about learnings from Phase 1 and what that has done to help us with specific actions that we're taking to address feedback in this phase and the next phase. We also want to talk about where we are with Phase 2 implementation, which begins next month. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll talk about the Huron consulting contract to have you review the proposed contract going forward for Phase 2. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about the PEAK initiative itself as a reminder of where we are. This first slide, assuming it comes up eventually, is a reminder of what we wanted to spend a few minutes talking about. We chose the name PEAK, which is Position for Excellence, Alignment, and Knowledge, because the initiative must always seek excellence. It must always continually adjust for new changes, and it must be based on knowledge of what is best for our talented workforce to adapt to the future. The university is undergoing a strategic transformation in how we administer critical services across human resources, finance, information technology, and marketing and communications. The purpose of this transformation is to create more value for our people, for our partners, and for the university. Across HR, across finance, IT, and marketing communications, we are creating a new service model focused on specialization that will create efficiency, consistency in service, and create meaningful career opportunities for our talented workforce. Shared resources and oversight allow for the consistent application of the best practices and policies with levels of support that do not rely on the reporting units. Scalable operations increase coverage as we need to ensure business always happens, and it always happens correctly. Implementing technology platforms to be leveraged across units, such as the service request you'll hear a little bit later on through Team Dynamics, as you will hear about later, the contract request for that document and that contract provides the kind of service that we need in the IT range. We also want to increase local capacity for the mission-driven financial planning, budgeting, and forecasting that we do. So these efforts are all aligned to make sure that we create more value, number one, for our people, more value for our partners across the university, and frankly, for the university to create and enhance every dollar that it gets in resources and using it wisely. Vice President Horstman?
Thank you, SVP Franz. We have made a great deal of progress, including a key program milestone on Monday of this week with the transition and implementation of services in the HR and Finance Operations Service Centers for Phase 1 units. This was a significant undertaking that involved a collaborative effort of all of our Phase 1 transition teams and locations. Our operations centers, our university leadership, the PEAK project office, and our consulting partners. In the months leading up to implementation, and a great deal of this has happened since the last time we met, we have focused on supporting internal talent development opportunities through the Expression of Interest program and posting processes. And this has resulted in 64 hires. 30 of those came through expression of interest. And of those positions, approximately 86% have gone to internal hires or EOI transfers. And that includes internal Marcom hires. We continue to hire in Marcom for their project, which is scheduled for January. And most importantly, during this process, there have been no jobs that have been lost in the transition of work, and there has been no reclassification of positions as a result of this work. We supported our teams with more than 2,400 hours of training for Operations Center and Center of Excellence employees. There have been more than 20 new pieces of training content for campuses, colleges, and units to help understand how to use the technology that is their tool. We hosted a 2-day event in Duluth focused on workforce and service transition, and 150 of those involved in Phase 1 operations across the system attended. We have spent over 1,700 hours testing our systems and met with our campus stakeholders to ensure we are ready. We are now seeing transactions begin to flow through the new service model via HR and finance operations centers this week. We are also preparing for the introduction of the Marcom Common Good Service Model, as I mentioned in January. Over the next few months, we will focus on moving through a stabilization period with what we call hypercare support. This manifests itself through chat rooms that are immediately accessible and responsive, daily stand-up meetings, both for leaders locally and centrally, as well as staff, walk-in office hours virtually and in person, and this week, command centers, both in the Twin Cities and in Duluth, that are being staffed throughout the day and sometimes into the evening. Would like to take a moment just to talk about information technology, the fourth pillar of our current peak project. And they too have been making changes and progress. Many of the model changes we're making in HR and finance have been made over many past years in IT. And so now they are moving in a little, the next sort of stage of this process, which involves a change to their leadership structure and an innovative model to develop our IT resources through use of virtual teams. With OHR, OIT is planning for a competency model and is beginning an RFP process for a talent marketplace platform that will initially be implemented with information technology. And once it's in place there, we will look at it for the human resources job family as well. And it's very possible that it would be a model to serve for additional functions. And what this type of marketplace helps with is career development and the best use of resources, because it allows us system-wide to match talent with priorities, and in the location they're in, they can have a new experience while they still continue to do their current job. And that is a platform that's necessary to do that in an environment like this. Key accomplishments in IT do include 2 new leadership positions. CJ Loosbrock is the Chief Technology Officer, and Phoebe Johnson is a Senior Director for IT Unit Leads, and she's been doing an amazing job connecting all the units together in one purpose. The launch of the Virtual Teams program in October of 2023, 4 teams were launched at that time, and we also had 3 teams prior to that in the month of May. This slide is sort of a way to step back and see the bigger picture of how transformation will impact our university system as we go forward. The types of work we're talking about include transactional processes ranging from hiring or reclassification steps of an employee to accounting and purchasing. Before, as you can see on the left-hand side, these processes were recreated across each unit and completed by local staff who spent on average 18% of their work duties on these tasks. As we have said before, that is a unsustainable challenge in training and support. It also presents the difficulty and challenge of inconsistent application of policy and processes. And so today, those requests are now being generated at the local level by a fully dedicated set of specialists in the operations centers with standardized processes and abilities to scale. The benefits of this new service model include, as I've said, standardized processes, employees who are dedicated to specific activities, and this increases our bench strength, allows us to backfill when there are gaps, leaves, vacations, et cetera, and subject matter expertise that can evolve a person's skills to where they become more like a case manager for escalated issues. It also increases efficiency and provides better compliance. Examples of where those who are in units who have had some of that 18% taken away can be applied include items like, for instance, I believe at your audit committee, you have talked about the UMD HR audit. There are processes in UMD that are not part of this initial peak scope, but this work will allow them to have the capacity to continue to organize some of that work around I-9s, around job applications, around background checks, et cetera, in a more organized manner that can meet the expectations of that audit. And there are many other examples such as that. So where are we headed from here? We're nearing, obviously, the end of the implementation for phase 1, but there is need for continuing support to make this successful. Does not happen overnight. It's a process. I'm happy to say that after 3.5 days, our dashboards are completely green. I don't expect that to hold true as we go forward and volume picks up. We do know it will take some time for users of the new service model to become as familiar with it as they need to be comfortable. Staff who have recently transitioned will also need time to adjust to their new teams and continue to receive on-the-job training and support. We also have established key performance indicators that I will talk about in a moment that will help us measure our progress. We are applying learnings to support future phases. We're going to learn a lot with this initial phase, and we'll continue to adapt, listen, and improve the service model over time. Supporting our people is a core part of PEAK. We have said that since the beginning conversations on this project, and it has an impact, obviously, on our people, and it varies in the impact across phase 1 units. We did have over 50 people of those 64 I mentioned move organizationally to a central unit. We have many people remaining in units who are having their work adjusted. One way we focused on supporting our people and connecting them was through the 2-day Duluth event that we spoke to. We had over 150 attendees from different areas come together. The event focused on building relationships in advance of service transition, providing content and focused opportunity for the leadership in these areas to connect. The functional breakouts were rated highly by the employees and staff here as they were able to meet their new teams and discuss their upcoming transition. So we have a number of reasons why the first phase is always the most important and the hardest to take. And it's important that we're making this proactive and decisive step for our university now. There are other things on the horizon in regard to administrative work that we all see in the news media and the environment, and we hear from peers and local employers. And we have to be ready for that too as job work changes and technology evolves. There are many unknowns we had to navigate through phase 1 in establishing these operations centers. So we have learned a lot. And some of the things we have learned is that while we started this project coming out of the pandemic and much of it was virtual, that did not really lead to great engagement or understanding of the project. And so early on, engagement is very important, and we have already made strides in that for the phase 2 teams where we have already met with them. And the work we have done in the last few months in phase 1 to get us to this point where we could implement would not have been possible without the in-person element coming into play. We have identified parts of the process where communication can be clearer and more transparent, and this includes the expression of interest process and the peak budget model as areas where we, I think, did put an exhaustive effort into communicating, but we've gained insights in how that landed and how we can adjust it for the future to have a best practice there. In general, communication and change management will continue to be key focus areas. It's not surprising given how complex this is and the significant transformation effort for the university. So what does success look like? We do have a number of levels and layers to how we are going to measure this. It starts with service level agreements that focus on preliminary key performance indicators across areas of quality, accuracy, timeliness, and experience. And they will be stated in a way that we can meet with each client group and show them what the responsiveness and support and success has been in providing these services and where we have an opportunity to improve and to get their feedback. It also provides us the opportunity to establish escalation paths and governance structures to monitor progress. In our first few days, as I have said, our dashboards are green. The transactions seem to be going smoothly. There are no major issues that have been identified. The teams continue to work with phase 1 units. There are questions on workflow and technology. And as I have said, we have command centers that are managing that and working through it and channels for people to connect throughout the day. While our team is currently very focused on making this transition a success and then getting started on phase 2 shortly, we are looking forward to bringing more insight into the performance of our investments to future board meetings as these SLAs take life and we have data to report. And with that, I'll turn it back to SVP Franz.
Thank you. As we look now, where do we go from here? I think one of the things that we look at in beginning phase 2 in January will be try to have that completed in 2024. During phase 2, our focus will turn to applying what we've learned from phase 1, obviously, but also adapting and adjusting where necessary to make that phase work even better than phase 1. We're going to be supporting larger units in phase 2, so the challenges will help us implement this at scale. But part of that design was to make sure that we had the experience in setting up these units and these centralized services so that we could implement this on a larger scale. So we will be doing some significant program support in 2024. Let me talk to you a little bit about the history of the Peak Partnership, especially with Huron. So one of the things that in 2021 is when we began the analytical part of this process to analyze what were the opportunities that existed at the University of Minnesota. Obviously, Huron and other consultants have applied these programs in other universities. There's been a lot of learning going on. So we wanted them to analyze the University of Minnesota for the opportunities that existed here. And you can see in some of the boxes there, some of the activity level that was engaged in by Huron during that first analytical phase. The second phase in 2022 was a design phase. Given what we knew existed at the university and the opportunities, how do we turn that around and map out a process that will work and be effective at the university? So that's when Huron helped us design finance, HR, IT, and marketing communication service delivery models that we could implement beginning in 2023. So 2023 became the time when we began implementing with the Huron working with us to do the transition that Vice President Horstman has just mentioned. So we've been heavily engaged with them since 2021, and we're now getting ready to go into another model. So let's talk a little bit about the shift. The first implementation phase on the left there, phase 1, is where Huron really co-led our teams. We needed their expertise, and they helped with the development of our Peak Project Office leadership. They helped with our workforce transition, and they also helped with our engagements with the different campuses and the different units. So it was through that Huron co-leading process that we were able to implement through phase one. We believe now, given the amount of resources we put into our own internal project office at Peak, we now have the ability to be university-driven during phase two with the support of Huron going forward. So throughout all of these activities, you will see UMN staff or university staff leading in the Peak Project Office, in the workforce transition, and also in facilitating the engagement and the change management opportunities. So this is where we really wanted to build the internal capacity, not just for the implementation of phase two, but for the long-term management of this continuous improvement process. I think now I'll show you a little bit about the Huron contract request that we're asking for your review at this time. Right now, you'll see that in the phase one implementation, we had a contract total of about $3.85 million during that first phase one implementation. During this phase one extension, which got us through to just about now, or in January, is a $2.75 million contract. And we're now seeking a $2.65 million contract going forward for about another month, or about another year into October of 2025. So I think one of the things we're interested in at this point is for your review and to show you that we're changing the model with the university leading in the model and asking continued support from Huron as we get through phase two. And I think at this point, we're ready to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you both. For all your hard work on this. It's been a long road so far, and to have the first phase kind of going is really important, and for continuing to work on this. So I'm going to open this up for discussion. Is there any discussion? Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Hibbs. I'm delighted that you haven't had any change of classification, if I got that right.
Yes.
Because that was a concern that potentially contract union positions would become civil service or that kind of thing. As the roles become more sophisticated, because part of what I'm hearing is that they're gonna acquire more skills. Will they maintain their present status despite getting more skills, or will we be using that as an opportunity, I hope not, to turn them into the civil service kind of thing?
Chair Hibbs, Regent Turner, that is a collectively bargained question. I think that we have to look to the future, and I don't have the answer here, but as you look at some of the possibilities with technology coming, I think there has to be sort of a shift in how we look at work and what we find allowable as far as flexibility and cross-training people. And I think that can change the definition of where positions lie in the future. Now, that's not a commitment, but I think it's an opportunity both for labor and for employers like the university to have a conversation on that. And I don't think it's immediate tomorrow.
No.
But it's something that I think I would be surprised if ASME leadership, Teamster leadership aren't thinking about some of those things themselves these days. So.
And then
Go ahead.
Then the other concern that I've had from way back was, as you said 64 positions have moved into the central. Have we been able to keep people in their community? Remember, I was worried about the economic status of various towns, kind of thing.
Like I said, no one has left due to this project. Of the 64, to clarify, about 50 of those have come into the central organizations. Those that have joined from Duluth, from Morris, from Crookston, have remained where they are and are working remotely, and we're working through a logical process of how they come together when it's important to be in person. But a lot of this work can be done remotely or in hotel space, and we're able to do that. Now, there is a larger group of people, obviously, if these are portion of jobs that have had some portion of their job impacted, and that is something we're continuing to work on as to how do we redefine those roles appropriately so they have fulfilling work and purposeful work. And as I was talking to a chancellor today, there aren't that many people out there to hire. We have work to do that isn't getting done. We can do this. It just, to be thoughtful, it does take time, and that is part of this implementation process too. So we're working through that.
Thank you.
Good. Regent Kenyanya.
No, I'm good, Mr. Chair.
Regent Gully.
Thank you, Vice President Horstman and Senior Vice President Franz, and Chair. I was wondering, so this is a little bit of a follow-up on Regent Turner's question. I've heard specifically from people in our bargaining units that it is very common for management to ask people if they want to transfer to a civil service role. And that sounds like direct dealing to me and is a huge problem. Can you speak to that? And I'm not sure if that's related only to the Peak Initiative or if it's something that's been going on outside of that, but I would really like some reassurance that that's not happening.
Chair Hibbs, Regent Gully, thank you for the question. I agree. If that were happening, it does sound like a direct dealing process to me. I can factually say that has not happened in Peak. There is a reclassification process at the university that an employee can initiate or an employee and supervisor can initiate, and it is reviewed and there's approval steps for that. So outside of that, anything that that has to happen. And are there times where we find out that something may be occurring that did not follow that process? Yes, and then there's an investigation. And we would not support that kind of activity. So I would also encourage, if you have examples that you would want to follow up with me on, I would be more than happy to check into those immediately.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anything else? Okay. Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you, presenters. I have two kind of comments. One, I was really pleased with slide 35 and slide 36. Slide 35 talking about the phase 1 welcome event, and then slide 36 with the chart that compared key learnings and actions we are taking. The phase 1 welcome event, I think, gets at some of the concerns that I had heard earlier on around engagement, and it's great to see that we took, this wasn't the only step, but highlighting this today, to see that this event happened, I think that's critical. And then kind of from a board governance perspective, I think something that I've was hoping to see today, and it saw this in the docket materials previously, but then listened to you present it, this kind of information presented this way around key learnings. That makes me feel better about what we're doing. It made me then transitioning to my second point about page 41 about the Huron contract request for phase 2. This kind of information makes me feel better about looking at something like a contract extension for Huron. I think I did not support the last one because I didn't feel like we had this type of information, and maybe we did, and I've been wrong up here before, so that's why I'm using an I feel statement versus we did or we didn't. But the way that this was presented today and really seen clearly what were our learnings. I think Regent Kenyanya last time when we were talking about the contract, I want to give you too much credit, so we'll have to watch the tape. But I think you said something about how are we evaluating these contracts, and I was very much feeling that way at the time. And before having a chance to look at this and hear the presentation, knowing that another contract request was coming for phase 2, I was feeling again along that sentiment. And I know this isn't up for action today, but seeing things like our learnings being clearly displayed, and then also page 40 around what the partnership model is looking like. Maybe we all absorb things differently at different times, but I feel like this peak presentation had different components in it that more clearly resonated with me, or were hitting the kinds of things that I've been concerned about before, in a way that was helpful from our our role in this as Regents, which is the governance and oversight part. I'm not really feeling what's going on a day-to-day basis from a staffing perspective, but we can, there's ways that we hear about this and talk about peak. And I was pleased with some information that I saw or I felt that was differently presented today in a positive way than maybe has been in the past. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent. Any follow-up?
Mr. Chair and Regent Farnsworth, well, thank you for those comments. I think that's a direct result of some of the recent hires we've been able to bring on board for the project. What you're seeing is the university taking over and having that expertise to help us plan and manage this in a way that's, we think, better for your governing opportunity, but also a lot of talented people out there making this work. So that's a thank you to them for making this better for you. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Hips. And actually, my question's on page 41, that same page with the contract request, because those numbers have made me choke and make me choke. But I know that in order to get the work done in an accelerated way, we need to spend more money to do that so that that happens. So my question is around the longer term as we look at an extension of phase 2 or phase 3, and will we continue to be working with Huron? And then when we look at the overall return on the investment, it would return quicker and maybe not just accelerated, but in a higher rate of return. I don't know, but could you talk about those two things, please?
Chair Hips, Regent Davenport, what you're seeing on this slide is sort of the, with all respect to my Huron colleagues, it's sort of the off-ramp. Phase 2 is we're changing the role of Huron. Huron recognizes that. We're jointly working on this. And the plan is post-phase 2 that the university would truly own it. Now, phase 3 going forward, are we going to need Huron at all? There may be even a lower level of some type of support that we need for some guidance. What this means too is we have to build a more robust project team on the university side. But as we have said from 2021 forward, if we just do what's in front of us in this project, it doesn't have a lasting effect. What we want is the capability to continue to look at this stuff and make it better as we go along. And that does require that kind of talent. So there's an investment there. As far as the return goes, I think, the faster we can go, the faster we get there. I do think some of the benefit of the financial return in this, which is, I think, what you're getting at, is in what we don't have to do in the future. If you go back to the slide where everyone had their own components, we are getting away from that. So as additional demands come in, we are better able to handle them in this model than we would have been able to before. And we'll be able to train for it. We'll be able to avoid compliance issues because people deeply understand the regulations. So, I do think when we get to the end of phase 2, we'll also have a mature enough phase where we may approach the second half of this a little differently. And I don't want to send the colleges and departments in phase 3 and 4 scrambling today. I think we've talked about this generally, but the idea would be to make it cleaner, clearer, and a little quicker for those who are going through the project in the moment. But how that looks, we still realize we're going to learn a lot in phase 2 that'll inform that.
Thank you.
Any follow-up? Regent Verhalen.
Thanks, Chair Hipsch. I just wanted to echo on to what a couple of my colleagues had said, but thank you. The additional transparency is really helpful. It's one thing to come to us with the front end proposal, here's what we're going to do, and then take the time during that process to say, what can we do better next time? And I think that that's really important for all of us to think about. I also really appreciate your strong response to the issues Regent Gully raised. And that will, as you said, continued education in what is and is not compliant with the law and our expectations. And the culture of this university is really important. And hearing it from the top, from you, and saying that that sounds like something we need to look into is very important and appreciated. And I hope and believe that as we continue, you know what our expectations continue to be as far as transparency in this process, but the more conversations we have about this and have these conversations among ourselves, but also in this forum, takes away some of the scariness of some pieces of this. When this was brought forward, it was a bunch of letters on slides and no one knew how it was going to be implemented. And here we go. And to hear the thoughtfulness that has gone into this, including the self-evaluation of we could have done this better, is really important. And being able to admit that is something that I certainly value, and I believe my colleagues do as well in these conversations, because in undertaking such a significant change for the betterment of the university and the community is sometimes really hard. But in that hardness can come some really great opportunities to make it better the next time around or the next phase. So thank you.
Thank you. I want to just thank all the regions for their thoughtful discussion on this. Your comments are great. And I'd also like to thank broadly everybody who's been involved in Peak. There's been just a lot of people that have touched this. And so thank you to everybody. We can't move it forward unless we all move it together. So thank you very much. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break.
And I've been executive.
Okay, I'm going to call the Finance and Operations Committee back to order. Our fourth item is to discuss the variables and levers impacting budget planning for fiscal 2025. I'd like to welcome Vice President Julie Tonneson to the presenters table, and you may proceed when you are ready.
Thank you. And good afternoon, Chair Hips and members of the committee. Welcome to my part of making finance fun today.
Go, Julie.
I'll do my best, but you know, it is a budget. So I'd like to start today by summarizing when our various planned discussions on the budget with you will occur throughout the year. In September, we discussed a general overview of the budget model that helps us translate the financial challenges and opportunities for the university down to each of our budgeting units. And then we also presented an overview of the annual budget process that results in our delivery of the President's recommended budget to you for review and action in the spring. That process is well underway for FY25, so this month, our focus with the board is on an overview of the primary revenue and expenditure variables that drive the budget each year. We'll discuss trends and the current status of those variables to gain your input and to provide you with background information on the budget overall. At the February board meeting, we will bring for discussion more refined estimates for the different revenue and expense variables that we will need to decide on specifically for the FY25 budget. It will be an opportunity for further discussion after you've had a little bit of time to think through what we're going to talk about here today. And finally, Interim President Ettinger will deliver his recommended FY25 operating budget for your review in May and action in June. Very briefly, I'd like to remind everyone why we distinguish between what we call the primary discretionary funds in the budget framework, namely the state appropriation, the unrestricted O&M appropriation, and tuition, versus all other revenues when we talk about the budget. Most plans for tuition and the O&M appropriation are shaped at the high institutional level. Many of the enrollment strategies, as well as the recommended tuition rates for the majority of students, are developed centrally. Additionally, it is university leadership that develops at the recommended request to the state of Minnesota for additional appropriations. Growth in these particular funds is necessary to support literally all aspects of our mission, direct programming as well as the associated overhead. All other revenues are then really everything else, which I will touch on more later in this presentation. The full recommended budget you will receive in May and June incorporates all of these revenues and their corresponding estimated expenditures. It is an all-funds budget. However, much of our conversation with you focuses on the state appropriation and tuition portion of this picture because of the decisions that are necessary at the institutional level to complete the budget. And I'll draw attention to those decision points as we walk through the variables today. Turning to the variables and levers, I'm first going to address the spending categories and trends that will drive some of our decisions with some early high-level cost estimates to introduce the magnitude of what we might be looking at for FY25. First, some history on the spending. This chart shows total expenditures from 2013 to 2023 adjusted for inflation. The maroon bars show total expenditures for all non-sponsored funds combined, adjusted to 2013 dollars. And the gold bars reflect the same thing for just the state and tuition funds portion of those totals. I think from this view of total expenditures, there are a couple of interesting messages. First, for all funds combined, our spending has grown over the prior year every year but one. You see the drop in FY21 thanks to reduced activities associated with the pandemic. The total growth over 10 years is 5.1%, but that growth has been at an average annual rate of only 0.6%, even while our scope and activity levels have increased. And second, our spending of state and tuition dollars has actually decreased over the last 10 years when adjusted for inflation. In total, 4.5%, and at a rate annualized over the 10 years of a minus 0.4%, which is evidence of increased reliance on other revenues and spending controls. Every year, we must address cost increases, and we have done so in part through our internal process to force reprioritization of existing resources. which helps pull down the annual change in expenditures from what they otherwise would be. That internal process is an important part of our budget balancing efforts. It forces conversations and decisions related to the types of actions that are highlighted here on this next slide. Each year, we ask our units to make decisions to use these tools to free up existing resources. They've had to search for opportunities to do more or the same at less cost. Partly because many of our units have reached a point where further significant reallocation will force a decrease in services or output in the near future, the institution recently began implementation of the PEAK initiative, as you just heard about in today's agenda. But for our purposes related to this conversation, it is relevant to note that the changes coming through that initiative will move some of the tools highlighted in gold here from the unit level to the institutional level. I should mention that you will not see cost savings from PEAK incorporated into the FY25 budget. This initiative is phasing in change over a multi-year time period, and because any savings derived from these efforts will vary by unit, the full net impact of the changes will not be known until all units have completed implementation. We've set up an internal monitoring plan so that at the conclusion of implementation, we will be able to identify productivity gains and actual net budget savings from the project. And at that time, we will be able to recognize the impact in the annual budget, but not until that point. The other tools highlighted here are used each year in different formats and magnitudes across all our units as they search for the most advantageous way to pull costs out of their budget. Turning now to the most pertinent cost variables for FY25 budget planning, we will talk through compensation, always a top budget item to address, utilities and debt, maintenance of our technology infrastructure, continuing compliance and safety needs, and efforts necessary to manage all aspects of enrollment, whether that be to maintain the number of students we serve or to grow that number in strategic ways. So starting with compensation. As this table shows, from FY14 to FY20, the university implemented general salary pool increases at roughly the rate of inflation or slightly above until we came to FY21 and FY22, in which we froze all but bargaining unit salaries one year and implemented a small across-the-board increase the next year, both in response to the budgetary impacts of COVID-19. Those modest increases allowed us to somewhat keep up with recruitment and retention needs during that time for many of our job categories, but not for all of them. Then with the onset of pandemic recovery in the economy, significant increases in inflation, and a decrease in the number of people seeking employment, the labor markets and our own goals to attract and retain talent required us to implement a significantly higher salary pool increase for both FY23 and FY24. While these increases have contributed greatly to rewarding our employees, we are still left with a very challenging compensation landscape. There are no signs right now that lead us to believe a return to about a 2% level of increase will be acceptable. In fact, last session, the state of Minnesota embedded in their planning framework assumed annual increases in wages of 4 to 5% per year, continuing through FY27. I have not looked to see what's embedded in the most recent forecast, but we will be doing that to see what their plans include. The decision to increase that overall salary pool here at the university and at what specific percent is largely based on three considerations. First, what is happening within the organizations with which we compete for talent. Second, we look at what is happening with the cost of living for our employees. And finally, we must consider what is happening with other costs within the university and the revenue sources available to pay the increases. Costs are high, and unrestricted revenue growth is constrained. In the end, it is a balancing act between these different forces that leads us to a decision on what to include in the budget. For magnitude, implementing salary pool increases like those of the last 2 years would mean cost increases of roughly $50 million for state and tuition-funded positions next year, and another $50 million for positions funded from all other sources. And beyond the general increase in the merit pool, there are wage pressures in a number of areas that may impact our budget plans for the next couple of years. The combined general pressures of external market competition for talent, and internal equity considerations across units and activities can lead to internal wage compression issues. In addition, in the last year, the University Senate has worked to summarize and build support within their committees for some significant changes in pay and working conditions for all employees. Right now, the institution and individual units have implemented or are thinking about strategies to address these types of issues across all our employee groups. Again, these are pressures that would fall on top of the general merit pool increases we will want to implement, and they will cost us millions of dollars. While compensation continues to be the most significant cost variable for our budget, for FY25, we can't forget we will be faced with some other significant costs. The 4 most significant outside of compensation are included here in this table. For facilities, the 3 drivers you see listed here will present unavoidable recurring cost increases. Utilities are projected to increase roughly 3%, largely driven by the impact of an increase in electric rates over a period of years and capital renewal costs to maintain the systems. Across all our campuses, this could add $2 to $4 million to our current utility budget. And for debt service, we are seeing the impact of 2 larger projects, the Chem Teaching Facility and the Advanced Operations Center, as well as several other smaller projects with initial costs appearing in FY25. A $5 to $6 million increase in cost here, which is projected, is roughly a 10% increase over this year's budget. Depending on the project, some units have identified revenue sources to pay the debt, but for others, such as the Advanced Operations Center, which will house our network operations and data center on the Twin Cities campus, we cannot rely on revenues generated by the activity in the new space. So the overall university budget will need to incorporate that cost. And finally, we will be opening the new library collection facility, which will add unavoidable operating costs on top of the debt and utilities I just mentioned. Generally, annual facility-related cost increases have been in the $5 to $7 million range, but for next year, we are looking at slightly above that. Any choices to enhance space or services would be over and above that total. A similar situation exists for technology. Negotiated vendor contracts often require an increase of roughly $2 million per year, while choices we might make to update or expand systems and functionality could push that total higher. The $5 to $10 million estimate shown here also reflects increase for maintenance and security enhancements, items that are increasingly required. Over the next several years, OIT will be working across the system to apply peak-related productivity enhancements to help temper growth in these costs going forward. In addition, we have been implementing a number of changes to enhance safety and security on our campuses, and we are aware of a broad set of needs that fall into the overall compliance category of spending, which often overlap with safety, actually. As we finalize the budget review process with our support units this month, we will have a better sense of what specific items might fall in the must-do category for them. And then we will add to that list as we review the budget needs of our academic units in the coming months. I would expect the total cost here to be several $1 million at least. And finally, enrollment-related costs and investments will be significant for next year. We strive every year to provide top-of-the-line services for our students, so necessary for positive student experiences and for retention. But in addition to that, we believe it will be necessary to implement expanded recruiting efforts, whether that be marketing campaigns or additional personnel. The goal for these combined efforts will be strategic maintenance or growth in enrollment. As we learned last year and are seeing a bit this year in isolated cases, the real impact of reduced enrollment has a huge strain puts a huge strain on the budget. So in addition to the new investments, we anticipate we will need to address some revenue shortfalls, and I'll explain that on an upcoming slide. Again, the cost of these items will be further developed this month and then again during the academic unit portion of the budget process after the first of the year. Again, this will likely be a multi-million-dollar challenge. I know, gloomy, right? Everything sounds so dire. Moving now to the resource variables in our budget framework, I'll walk through some information related to the state appropriation, tuition, our internal reallocation process that I mentioned just a bit earlier, and any other variables that we can bring to the table. But first, one summary look at our revenues. I have shared this slide many times and will continue to update it as we move forward because I think it does tell an important part of our financial story over time. Back in 1990, almost 35 years ago, the state appropriation represented 39% of our total revenues. But then plotting each 6-year increment since then, the direct state appropriations to the U have fallen down 12% of our total revenues from 1990 to 2008, and then another 10% from 2008 to today. In the earlier years of that larger drop, tuition revenue growth made up a greater share of the shortfall or the change, growing from 12% to 22% of our total revenues, while all other revenues grew from 48 to 52% of our total. Keep in mind that in total, the revenues had to grow not just to make up for actual reductions in state funding in some of those years, but also to cover the annual cost increases, like those I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And then from 2008 to today, the same pattern of decreased reliance on state funding holds, except that tuition has barely moved as a percent of our revenues, a direct result of stable enrollment combined with holding rate increases down for students. And the reliance on other revenues has grown. It's hard work to grow sales income, philanthropy, endowment earnings, grants and contracts, and so on, but that is what we have done, so that today those other sources make up 60% of our total revenues. As I mentioned on other occasions, this is good, but it also adds an element of complexity in budgeting and puts a great deal of pressure on the shrinking portion of our total revenues, the state and tuition funds portion, to support general operations and discretionary investments. Further evidence of why budgeting is getting trickier is on this slide that focuses on the change in the state appropriation. At $765.1 million each year of this biennium without adjusting for inflation, the appropriation has edged up 8% compared to 15 years ago. However, adjusting for inflation using CPI, an appropriation of $708.8 in FY08, just before the Great Recession, would have the same buying power as $996.6 million today, which is $231.5 million more than our actual appropriation. Even prior to recent inflation impacts, that gap was in the $110 to $180 million range. That means cost controls and growth in other sources of revenue have been necessary to fill the gap in buying power over time. We will not give up on growth in state funding, however, and the potential for gaining back some of that lost buying power. We feel the university is critical to the health of the state and will continue to take our story to them for investment. As you approve this fall, we will be submitting a request to the state of Minnesota next session to increase our base appropriation for core operations by $45 million in FY25. This is consistent with our original submitted request for the second year of the biennium last fall, and in combination with our part of the proposed partnership, which would include modest tuition increases and continued internal budget cuts potentially, the requested $45 million increase for core mission support would greatly improve our ability to cover the projected costs that I just mentioned. There's some very positive impacts of the proposed investment from the state. It will allow us to do the things you see here as part of the FY25 budget. It would mean the ability to implement lower tuition rate changes than otherwise might be necessary, the ability to invest in our students through needed enhancements to services and classrooms, the ability to address more in the way of compensation and improved working conditions for our employees, and the ability to provide critical research infrastructure and safety and security investments. Conversely, if the state decides not to provide the additional $45 million, it will mean a delay in advancing strategic plan goals, consideration of a lesser increase in the salary pool, deeper budget cuts in university units, and greater pressure on tuition in order to balance the budget. I'm anticipating that we will first prepare a fully balanced budget recommendation to you, assuming current law. So assuming we do not get the $45 million. It will be a budget with more of the negative impacts that I just mentioned. But since we will likely not know the state's decision about our proposed appropriation increase until after you review the budget in May, we will be forced to plan in this way. So we'll deliver plans to you for a budget without the additional funding, and at the same time, we can include options for how any additional appropriation would change what we are recommending to you. Kind of a contingency plan for to direct that happier occasion if it would come about. The proposal for an additional $60 million in O&M and state funding for the academic health funding that you heard about earlier this morning and will again in February is in addition to this $45 million core request, and it's for a very specific need. So it wouldn't directly support the costs that I've laid out here for you today. We can talk more about what we are seeing on our supplemental request and our impressions of what is in the state's fund forecast when we meet in February. So moving on to tuition, this year our tuition revenue is projected to come in at roughly $990 million. You can see here projected revenues from the various tuition-paying student populations that were built into this year's budget, with the largest proportion of revenue derived from Twin Cities resident reciprocity, undergraduate students followed by Twin City graduate students, and so on. The actual amount of tuition revenue received is impacted by a variety of things, including the tuition rates, enrollment, course registrations or credits per student and how they fall within and outside of the tuition band, the mix of students, resident versus non-resident, graduate versus undergrad, and so forth, and the portion of students eligible for different waivers. As those things shift, the revenues shift, and at the unit level in particular can lead to actual revenues coming in differently than budget. It's actually quite complicated when you get down to it. In most years, however, our projected tuition revenue for the budget turns out to be less than 1% off from what we actually receive. Sometimes we are over budget and sometimes we are under budget. Last year, you will remember that halfway through the year, we realized and communicated to the legislature that our estimates based on spring term registrations indicated our tuition revenues were coming in almost $24 million below budget. That large of a variance was very unusual and driven primarily by an unanticipated drop in retention rates across the system. Our estimating processes failed us last year. And because our additional request to the state for help in funding that $24 million also failed, we had to adjust our FY24 budget to cover that revenue loss. So this year, we have instituted a change in our processes. We're now estimating current year revenues earlier based on fall registrations, and that is what you see reflected here for this fiscal year. We're working with each system campus and each college on the Twin Cities campus to understand these estimated variances and to adjust their spending now so that we don't have to play catch up for the entire variance in the FY25 budget. The projected shortfall in total is within the normal range for the Twin Cities campus at minus 0.4% and does not pose a problem overall. There are a handful of colleges that are facing a more significant challenge, but certainly not all of them as we experienced last year. And actually working through this challenge for several colleges is a very typical and normal part of our annual budget process. Crookston's budget for this year is in a good place as they look to be experiencing potential revenues above what they planned. Rochester is facing what is believed to be a one-time shortfall. For Duluth and Morris, however, the variances are again in the wrong direction and continue to be troubling, especially on top of the shortfalls in each of the past several years. We have already begun to work with them on verifying these estimates and developing actions to lower costs in real time wherever possible. Despite these early efforts, some of the shortfalls across the campuses will make their way into the FY25 budget balancing process. Our best estimate, using trend data at the college and campus level and assuming no overall change in enrollment, is that each 1% increase in each of the rates would yield $9.5 million in new revenue. Among the decisions we make for the budget that most directly impact tuition revenue, clearly the rate is the most impactful. Over the last 10 years, the average annual increase in the resident undergraduate tuition rate has been 1.5% on the Twin Cities campus and 0.7 to 0.9% on the system campuses. Today, on the Twin Cities campus, the resident undergrad rate plus fees ranks 5 out of 13 in the Big Ten, excluding Northwestern and the new people coming in. And for the undergraduate non-resident rate, we rank 8th. The system campus rates continue to be on the high end compared to most of the schools with which they compete for students. The tuition rate chosen for the various groups is a conscious decision each year, factoring in student demand and balancing the real costs faced by the institution the availability of other resources, concerns we all share regarding the student's ability to pay, and the corresponding availability of financial aid. Enrollment changes are factored into budget revenue estimates as well. For the Rochester campus, we are anticipating continued growth consistent with their campus plans, with fall 24 new freshman numbers returning to previous levels after dropping this year. For the Twin Cities, we will likely see relatively stable enrollment next year, even if the freshman class continues to be strong due to the recent trend for numbers to drop off some in years 2 through 4. But we will work with each college on the specific changes they are seeing. For Crookston, will likely anticipate stable enrollment or a slight decrease based on trend to be on the conservative side, rather than factoring in a continuation of the growth they saw this fall. And for Duluth and Morris, we've been experiencing lower enrollments than anticipated in the budget, so we will work with them to arrive at realistic estimates, hopefully stabilizing at current levels, but not budgeting based on that hope. As we are more dependent on tuition revenue than ever before, the assumptions that we build into these estimates are really critical and are vitally important in the process. The third resource category I wanted to summarize today is what we call reallocations. This is our internal practice of finding efficiencies or purposely reducing or eliminating expenditures on a recurring basis in order to reinvest existing resources elsewhere. In some cases, we will be in the position of implementing larger expense reductions for two purposes. In part, to offset a loss of revenue, and in part, as a reallocation to cover other cost increases or higher priority investments, which don't go away, unfortunately, when the revenues drop. The amount of planned internal budget cuts as included in the board-approved budgets for the last 10 years is displayed on this chart. For the majority of those years, we implemented reallocations hovering right around 1%. Moving forward, we have to choose how deep to push the budget reductions for FY25. Preliminarily, we have instructed units to provide plans for a 0.75% reduction. As we move through the process, we will refine those targets in total and by unit. I also want to note that up to this point, we have not implemented reductions in an across-the-board fashion to our units. Instead, we combine a review of each unit's unique financial situation with the overall goals and needs at the institutional level before deciding on the unit-level plans. The combination of relatively smaller increases in our state appropriation, decisions made to hold tuition rate increases under the rate of inflation, the expansion of our scope and impact, and inflation have all meant that we have not been able to balance the budget without this annual reallocation process in recent years. Finally, as I pointed out in an earlier slide, we've become more reliant over time on growth in other revenues to fully support our activities. So what we are talking about specifically in that space is listed here. In the interest of time, I won't define each category for you today, but hopefully most are familiar to you by now, and we can certainly provide more information during the discussion if you have questions on what these are. For the current year, we have budgeted roughly $2.7 billion in total from these sources, which represents, again, 60% of our total revenues. Within the budget process, these, quote, other revenues are managed more at the local unit level where the action takes place. It's expected that the units will do the work to grow these revenues to cover all associated cost increases and even, where possible, to relieve some of the pressure on the O&M tuition side of the budget. If they cannot grow the revenue for some reason, then they're expected to lower costs in those activities and balance in that way. On some occasions, these expectations are actually very difficult to meet, and we do impact the state and tuition funds in balancing, either by moving expenses previously supported by state and tuition funds to growth in these other revenues, or by shifting costs the opposite direction and increasing the subsidy support for these other activities. Both can be legitimate options to strategically balance the budget while maintaining our core services and activities. In arriving at those decisions, please understand that we do encourage our units to grow these other revenues to benefit the institution and their own activities. As you are aware, 7 goals within Impact 2025 are directly tied to revenue production, which leads to new efforts and new activities to earn revenue or to an increased focus on leveraging existing sources. In addition, the budget model itself that we discussed in September has components designed to incent this revenue growing behavior. Units do keep the revenues they generate, so they can see the direct benefits of those results. In addition, we will always consider the opportunity to apply growth in other revenues to meet cost increases instead of cutting existing spending levels, which sometimes results in a better outcome for the units. I mentioned earlier some of the complexity in our budget in terms of multiple revenue sources, and the most obvious challenges are listed here. Many are restricted and/or non-recurring. The ability to generate these revenues varies greatly by unit, and sometimes they come with increased operating costs. Bringing all the revenues together at the unit level for a minute, many of you have seen this chart before. It shows the diversity of revenues at the academic unit level, and it carries, I think, several messages. First, the size of these units varies significantly. Second, every one of these units receives some amount of state appropriation, which is the lime green color. And third, perhaps most relevant for today's discussion, it helps to demonstrate that varying reliance on other revenues I just mentioned. The lime green, the state appropriation, and the royal blue, which is tuition, represent the framework revenues. If you exclude those for units like the College of Liberal Arts on the Twin Cities campus, the Carlson School, or the Morris campus, there's very little left in their revenue options. If you look at units like the medical school, the College of Food, Ag, and Natural Resource Sciences, the School of Public Health, or the College of Veterinary Medicine, their activities are generating sales or clinical income, sponsored grants, ICR, and non-sponsored contracts in larger proportions. There is risk with reliance on other revenues and more to manage, but there's also more opportunity. And it's important to understand that the options for some units to grow these resources are greater than for others. That is in part why we approach each unit separately in making decisions to arrive at a strong and balanced budget. And finally, this chart serves as a good opportunity to point out that we actually go through the budget process attempting to address the issues and priorities for each individual unit. These on this chart, as well as the many support and auxiliary units that do not appear here. We balance at this level first and then add it all up in a way that delivers a comprehensive, strategic, and balanced budget for the institution as a whole. And in that process, the president decides how to build the variables we've discussed today into the recommended operating budget you will see in May. To get to these recommendations, there is an internal process that involves the chancellors, deans, and vice presidents, relying on them to build budget responses that directly correspond to their unit level and university level strategic plans and goals. They're also responsible for identifying financial challenges for their units and proposing solutions, sometimes in partnership with the university. It is a very distributed budget management model. But there's also significant direction given to units in the process and significant opportunities for the president and the leadership team to steer the ship. The overall process is designed to make each unit as successful as possible while achieving overall university goals, which in turn leads to a stronger institution. The process to arrive at that point includes the discussion here today. So let me close my comments on this topic, as I have in the past in December, by sharing with you a setup for the anticipated conversation on the budget that we will have at the February meeting. As you think about the various resources and the costs, the prompts you see here directly relate to decisions we'll need to make in building the president's recommended budget for FY25. So either today or over the next several months, your thoughts and statements of priority would be very helpful as we go forward. So, Mr. Chair, with that, I am happy, and we are all happy to have a discussion on the budget if you want to continue the fun.
Thank you for your great presentation, like usual. Every year I hear it and I always learn something from it. I got one thing that I'd just like to ask. So this morning we had Vice President Priya here to talk about research funding, okay? So we're gonna go from, $1 to $1.5 billion, hopefully, eventually. So what happens to that extra, let's say we brought in 100 more million in research. Does anything go to or is it all, that's all for specific causes, right? So we can't supplant part of that for administration or anything, or?
Yeah, good question, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. So there are two pieces depending on where the sponsored funds are from. There's the direct funding for the grant itself, for the work of the grant itself. And depending on where it comes from, it also might supply a portion of a reimbursement for overhead, which we call ICR or F&A funds. So for example, $100 million, if it all came from NIH, it wouldn't be $100 million. It would be $100 million restricted to the grant work, and then an additional roughly 50% of that for overhead. That overhead money is unrestricted. It goes to the units, the colleges that are doing the research work, and can be used to help pay for costs here. I would like to mention, however, that in analysis we've done over the years, we have been able to prove that research does not pay for itself, even with that overhead expense. And so, yes, there is a contribution towards the overhead, but it will cost the institution even more than that to be able to provide the facilities and the support for that research work. So it is an investment. It is an investment in the institution.
Thank you for that. I kind of figured that. So the pie is getting bigger, but we're putting more into it. So yeah, that's interesting. So Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Hips, and always I'm learning things too. Today I'm not remembering some things. Okay. So one's on the cost side and one's on the resource side. On the cost side, would you please remind me what the general merit pool includes, who it's targeting? It's not bargaining unit, it's not faculty.
Yep. Okay. So Chair Hips and Regent Davenport, the bargaining unit contracts are what they are. We must pay those. And in many years, the general salary pool has been the same increase as the bargaining unit increase, but it doesn't have to be. So the general salary pool is for all other employees, including students. It's staff, students, faculty, everybody. It is, depending on the size, it has most often been managed as a merit pool. So what that means is the units calculate, and in the budget, we plan for what a general 3% is going to cost. But then when they actually go through the process of delivering those increases to employees, it's a merit-based process. So some will get less, some will get more, averaging 3% in general. This last year, we implemented a 4% pool. But when we asked the units when we directed them on how to implement that, we said, consider the merit pool to be 3.75% and then hold the 0.25% to adjust for different market and equity kind of issues that they're dealing with. So that it gets implemented a little bit differently in the units.
So just for clarification on that piece, so I understand bargaining unit. Mm-hmm. I understand merit, and there's difference depending on merit. But where are the faculty sitting in that? Yeah. They're not really the merit, or are they?
Yeah, they are part of the merit pool. There are promotional increases that are automatic, much like steps in a labor contract. But outside of the promotional changes in rank, they are part of a merit pool process.
So I'm sorry. So promotional from assistant professor to that, those dollars come out of the merit pool.
Generally speaking, they can, and in some units, the units pay for that over and above the merit pool.
I'm a little confused.
It's always messy.
Yeah, and just I'm thinking ahead to tomorrow's discussion with the Senate Consultative Committee and how that fits into that, because faculty are not judged in merit per se as an administrator would, but they are meeting merit by advancing to professor or full professor, or am I still mixed up?
Mr. Chair, Regent Davenport, it's my understanding, and I'm going to phone a friend, yes, that the faculty are part of the merit process. So they do get the promotional, just like I mentioned, that is obviously there's a merit decision on the promotion, but once they are granted the promotion, that is an automatic set dollar increase. But the annual increase, cost of living, merit, that is a part of the merit pool process for faculty as well.
Okay, thank you.
And then you had a,
I have a resource then question. On the resource side, the impact of retention. And when we look at the budgets, and this would be page 68 and 66, 1%, 1% change in enrollment is about $9.5 million system-wide.
Mr. Chair, Regent Davenport, that's rate. Not in enrollment.
In the rate, okay, that's where I was
Yeah.
confusing. But I think it's also really important, and I'm assuming this is happening, each campus knows in terms of FYE, what an FYE brings in, so that when they're looking at what's happening on their campus, from top to bottom in an organization and across, people understand the dramatic impact retention can make. Thank you.
Yes.
Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I got a million questions, but I'll try to keep it to like one or two. So merit-based, this whole thing, this is totally foreign to me. Just appreciate that first. So you're saying, I just want to clarify. So you got 4%, and what I think I heard you say is that 0.25% is kind of pulled out and kind of used for giving some people a bigger raise than others. I mean, does the general population of merit-based people kind of get roughly about the same kind, but that 0.25 is left over for the like exceptional kind of? And then how do we keep data on what is an exceptional employee and all that other kind of stuff, and how much more than? I'm coming from a world of equity as far as pay, so how much data, et cetera, and you don't have to give it to everyone, but boy, I sure would love a little tutorial on how this works, and just to make sure it's on the up and up.
Mr. Chair, Regent Turner, I am obviously a little outside my wheelhouse. I'm not the best to do that tutorial for you on that process, but we do have an annual performance evaluation process that all employees go through with their supervisors. And as a result of that process, there is an assessment of if they are meeting expectations, exceeding expectations, so forth. But I don't want to get into the specific, sort of ratings. But just from a budget perspective in general, this year, not every year, but this fiscal year, for the 4%, we said we're going to implement a 3.75% increase merit pool. So 3.75 is I'm going to use the word average, but from a budget perspective, they're going to say, okay, if I'm going to spend 3.75% more, this is what I have to spend, and this is how I'm going to distribute that across my employees based on, again, non-bargaining unit, based on their performance, right? The 0.25% was meant to cover market and equity kind of issues. So if we have retention problems, if some are particularly below market and we're having retention issues or recruiting issues, they could use those additional 0.25 worth of their spending on making those types of adjustments. And that was a choice in implementation this year for FY24 in how we implemented the overall planned increase in the salary pool. And then the bargaining units were 4%. That was the agreed upon increase for bargaining units.
Yeah, and I remember hearing about the whole market thing when I was in the audit and compliance for just a few times, about how, people here could be going out into the private sector and making 3 times more than what they make here. So I do appreciate what that 0.25 is. And I'm sorry for all the basic questions, guys, but this, like I said, this is a whole different world for me.
Yeah.
So if anyone had the time I can make that general request to have a more in-depth with that whole concept, I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Regent Turner, I think my colleague is listening.
But do lunch, right? Okay.
Regent Gully.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much for being here and this was a really great presentation and really appreciate it. I just want to, I actually mostly just have a comment. I just want to surface that I appreciate that this isn't the way that that people tend to think about this, but that there are a lot of people who do work for the university, like adjuncts, who don't get included in those salary increases at all. So I just want to lift that up because it's really important that we recognize that. And if I'm wrong about that, please correct me.
Yeah, I was going to say, Chair Hips and Regent Gully, she said it's complicated, but there are a lot of different units, a lot of different choices, a lot of different options to make adjustments. So it does get complicated pretty fast.
Of course. But what I'm saying is where everyone else has access to merit increases and things like that, there's no structured plan for adjuncts or contingent faculty or to have those kinds of.
I will say, Chair Hips and Regent Gully, and this isn't a very specific answer, but I will tell you that from a budgeting perspective, how we calculate these pools, we actually include total salary budgets, regardless of type of employee, and when we calculate the pools and when we plan for the spending. So in that regard, there is some room.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate it. That does make sense too.
Thank you. I think one of the things that we all have to understand, and I don't know, we can't cut our way to prosperity. So, changing our scope is difficult. I get that, but if the students aren't there, or something isn't there, we're going to have to become very entrepreneurial on how we approach this, I believe. Yeah, otherwise we're going to be, Sears didn't think they had to change their scope. And here comes Amazon, and Amazon changed their scope for them. So, we have to really start to think about this in an entrepreneurial way. Are we going to keep letting the students defect our state and go to other states to college, on our bordering states, and how much are we going to take, And so I liked your questions, and I just want everybody to think about the last slide up there for next month, so we can really have a robust discussion on what that looks like, because there are only so many levers to pull, and there's only so many funding places to get the money, right? And so we're going to have to go after it a lot more. So does anybody else have any comments? So let's all be really thinking about that last slide there. It's a really good slide because it really kind of generates a lot of, hopefully it generates a lot of discussion for February. So thank you. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, we're next. Next on the price is right here. Okay, now we turn to a discussion on the fiscal year 2023 annual report on targeted business, community, economic development, and small business program. This is a report required by board policy. Here to lead the discussions are Assistant Director Rebecca Ebert from the Office for Supplier Diversity and Associate Vice President Tina Marisam. Associate Vice President Marisam, would you like to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hitch.
Did I say your name correctly?
You got it.
Okay. Thank you.
We are so excited to share information about the Office for Supplier Diversity and its targeted business program, which is run by my colleagues, Executive Director Sharon Banks, who couldn't be here today, Assistant Director Rebecca Ebert, and also Business Development Manager Wayne Wittoon, who's here today. As some background, the Office for Supplier Diversity was formerly called the Office for Business and Community Economic Development. Recently, the office underwent a major review and also reorganization to really refocus its resources on its most impactful function, which is increasing the diversity of the university's suppliers. As part of this reorganization, the office eliminated a number of programs that were unrelated to supplier diversity, drafted a new mission statement, strategic plan, and work plan focused solely on its core mission of supplier diversity. The mission of the newly configured office is to work with businesses owned by women, BIPOC, and disabled individuals, and with other underserved businesses to facilitate their integration into the university supply chain. Although progress has been made in these areas, these businesses still face unique challenges that can undermine their success, including difficulty accessing capital, discrimination and bias, limited network and mentorship opportunities, and lack of access to supplier and distribution networks, among other things. So by providing support to underserved local businesses and by connecting them with university purchasers, the Office for Supplier Diversity is able to leverage the university's resources to build powerful economic partnerships in our communities. The office also aims to widen the pool of potential suppliers and thereby promote competition in the university's supply base. The office has 4 key goals in its strategic plan. The first goal is to increase university buyers' interest in purchasing from businesses owned by women, BIPOC individuals, and disabled individuals. And we refer to these businesses as targeted businesses. Many employees throughout the university system have purchasing power to buy office furniture, to buy office supplies, lab supplies, other goods, also services. And our employees with purchasing authority are often unaware of diverse businesses that can meet their purchasing needs. And this can make it difficult for historically underrepresented businesses or newer local small businesses to make their way into our supply chain. So the office's goal is to go out into our community to identify targeted businesses that can fill our university's purchasing and construction needs, and then to provide them with support in becoming a university supplier. The office's third key goal is then to facilitate connections between those targeted businesses and university buyers who are in need of the goods or services that those businesses can provide, so that ultimately the university can increase its spend on these historically underrepresented businesses. Some university contracts are so large, such as major construction projects, that targeted businesses, many of which are more likely to be small businesses, are unable to compete for the entire job. So in these cases, the Office for Supplier Diversity works to promote subcontracting relationships between the smaller targeted businesses and the larger suppliers that are bidding on the university contracts. The office also works to increase the proportion of women, BIPOC individuals, and disabled individuals who perform labor on our construction contracts. And finally, the office's fourth goal is building an effective infrastructure to support supplier diversity growth. And right now, these efforts are focused on working with our colleagues in Duluth, Morris, Crookston, and Rochester to provide resources and to ensure that our supplier diversity program is a system-wide effort. With that, I'll turn it over to our Business Development Manager, Wing Watoon, to share some of the strategies that are being used to implement the Office's supplier diversity goals.
Thank you, VP Marisam. Good afternoon. I'm glad to have this opportunity to share some of the strategies that we're using to increase supplier diversity at the university. Fostering meaningful connections between university buyers and targeted businesses starts with communication. We need to know our purchasers and understand their needs. We need to identify targeted businesses in our community who are ready to provide services or goods to the university. To that end, the Office for Supplier Diversity has rolled out new marketing initiatives with content developed specifically for each of our 2 primary audiences, and those are targeted businesses and university purchasers. We advertise internal events and announcements from community partners. We publish a newsletter that highlights targeted businesses to increase their exposure to university purchasers. Our office also runs an online targeted business directory, which has a search engine that allows university purchasers to search for targeted businesses that provide the service or product they might need. The directory also helps majority-owned businesses to find targeted businesses to bring on as subcontractors. This directory currently lists over 600 targeted businesses, and many of these businesses were newly added to the directory in FY23. And finally, awareness of this directory is growing. It's been viewed more than 10,500 times between January and June of 2023. Supplier diversity work is built on relationships. So throughout FY23, the office prioritized developing its internal and external relationships. In addition to internal university presentations and event collaborations, the Office for Supplier Diversity has a strong presence in the local community, attending and hosting events, conferences, monthly meetings, networking opportunities, and trade shows. Our external partners include diverse business organizations, federal, state, and local public agencies, economic development organizations, technical assistance centers, chambers of commerce, small business resource centers, and supplier diversity professional councils. The university hosted its annual Supplier Diversity Expo in October, which was back after a COVID-related hiatus. The expo raises awareness about the university's supplier diversity program and promotes connections between targeted businesses and university buyers. It includes a trade show, topical presentations and workshops, and a luncheon where OSD recognizes university staff, departments, and vendors that demonstrate exemplary support of supplier diversity. The exhibit booth sold out, and we had nearly 500 university and external community attendees in October, which was on par with the volume at the expo pre-COVID. It was clear from our expo participation that there's a great deal of energy and commitment around our supplier diversity program, both among university purchasers and among local women, BIPOC, and disabled-owned businesses who are looking to do business with the university. Our outreach in the community yields results. For example, the office collaborated with the university's Capital Project Management Office to deliver a presentation to members of the Association of Women Contractors earlier this year. And we heard from a member in attendance who is a female Hispanic business owner. She said that the relationships she built with university staff at that meeting had helped her business gain visibility to university decision makers, and as a result, had generated real opportunities to do business at the U. In another instance, an Asian American-owned business became aware of the university's targeted business program through the office's community outreach and subsequently leveraged their BIPOC-owned business certification in the RFP process. They ultimately won the contract. The Board of Regents policy entitled Targeted Business, Community Economic Development, and Small Business Programs states the board's support for using the purchasing power of the university to enhance equal employment and business opportunities for women, BIPOC, and disabled persons. This policy is one of the university's strategies for increasing supplier diversity. Among other things, the policy states that the university will provide suppliers who bid on certain high-dollar amount construction and goods and services contracts with additional points in the bidding process if they, 1, are certified as a targeted business, 2, enter into subcontracts or supplier agreements with targeted businesses, or 3, in the case of construction contracts, employ meaningful numbers of women, BIPOC, and disabled individuals. And now I'll turn to Assistant Director Ebert to share the FY23 results of our targeted business program.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to share information from our FY23 targeted business program report. This first chart shows the university's spend with targeted businesses in each of the last 5 years. As you can see, the university spent nearly $80 million on targeted businesses in FY23, which was almost a $6 million or 8% increase from FY22. This chart shows that we are nearly back to pre-COVID levels of spend with targeted businesses. This slide provides a little more detailed information about the university's FY23 spending on targeted businesses. The WMDBE abbreviation on this slide refers to targeted businesses or women, minority, and disabled-owned businesses. Under the heading of construction expenditures, you can see that 34% of the university's total construction expenditures went to targeted businesses in FY23. And under the heading of purchasing expenditures, you can see that 5.5% of the university's total non-construction goods and services expenditures went to targeted businesses in FY23. We see a lot of opportunity for growth in this area of non-construction goods and services expenditures. During our recent office reorganization, we reallocated funds to support a position that focused on increasing supplier diversity in those non-construction goods and services purchases. And finally, under the grand total heading, you can see that there's 11.8% of the university's total FY23 expenditures went to targeted businesses. This number is up slightly from FY22, where 11.4% of the university's expenditures went to targeted businesses. This slide shows the breakdown of total FY23 spending directed toward businesses owned by women, Native Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanics, African Americans, and persons with disabilities. You can see that women-owned businesses did the most business with the university, earning around $50.5 million in expenditures. Our higher engagement with women-owned businesses is expected, given the data showing that there's a higher proportion of women-owned businesses that are available in our marketplace to do the work. And I want to mention as well, when we say women on this, we're talking about white women specifically. Native American-owned businesses also did significant business with the university at $16.5 million. Black, Hispanic, and Asian-owned businesses earned from $2.8 to $4.8 million in university spend. We saw significant increases from FY22 to FY23 in university spend on Black and Hispanic-owned businesses in both the construction and goods and services categories. More specifically, university spend with Black-owned businesses increased by 47%, and spend with Hispanic-owned businesses increased by 39%. And again, that's construction and goods and services combined. Certified disabled-owned businesses, which are overall a smaller share of the available certified targeted businesses, earned under $300,000 in FY23 expenditures. Our final slide here breaks these numbers down a bit further so that you can see separately construction spending and those goods and services spending. You can see women-owned businesses earned the most spend in both construction and goods and services spending categories, which again is expected. Native American-owned businesses did very well in construction spending, but we have more area for growth in the goods and services spending category. In contrast, Asian and African American-owned businesses were both stronger in goods and services than in the construction area. The university's supplier diversity program supports commitment 4.3.3 in the MPAC 2025 strategic plan, which is focused on growing university partnerships with underserved local communities. In FY23, the university purchased goods or services from 294 Minnesota-based targeted businesses. 5% of the university's total spend, all their spend overall in FY23, went to Minnesota-based businesses owned by women, BIPOC individuals, or disabled individuals. In FY23, the university spent $35.5 million on Minnesota-based targeted businesses, and in the last 5 years, that number is $174 million. So I just have a few final remarks. The Office for Supplier Diversity is working really hard to continue to grow this targeted business program and other supplier diversity initiatives. We are really proud that the university is leveraging its spending power to utilize and promote women, BIPOC, and disabled-owned businesses. We hope to see the spend numbers on these slides increase in the coming years. This work can only be done in partnership, and we're very lucky to have incredible partners in the purchasing department. Their leaders, Beth Tapp and Mike Volna, are true advocates for this work. We also have exceptional partners in Bruce Gritters and Capital Project Management, as well as in Facilities Management and the U-Market teams. We're so grateful for the board policy and for your commitment to this work. That concludes our remarks, and we welcome your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. If you go back to the slide on the Board of Regents policy, for us, it's slide number 89. Right there. There's one word added to this that's not on my sheet. You know what it is? Urban. Okay. Coming from rural Minnesota, I'm just wondering why that's in there and what is our policy? Yep.
Chair Hibbs, there was an original part of the title and the wording that was in the policy. However, I believe it was last year or perhaps 2 years ago, we led an initiative to remove it. So it was updated to remove the term urban.
Okay, so the correct one is in our handout, not on the screen. Okay, that makes me feel good. Okay. Any discussion? Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Hips. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I have a question about the table on the bottom of what in our packet is page 79, where it shows the university goal and the actual utilization. And as with anything, it takes time to close that gap. But I'm wondering if let's say I'm in a department or a college and I have a big print job, how would I know that this program is out there and get directed to it? I'm wondering on the internal promotion.
Chair Hips and Regent Davenport. So that is a big challenge for us and something that we are really looking, we have a priority for moving forward. So with the reconstruction of our office last year, we're kind of taking our first baby steps as a brand new program with everyone kind of trained up in a full team. So one of our big initiatives is awareness. There's sort of a joke around our office that supplier diversity is the university's best kept secret. And so we're trying to make sure that we can get the word out about it. And so a lot of that is presentations. We do a lot of different types of outreach. And really that's just so that they know that we are here. We have our targeted business directory, which is a fantastic resource for anyone who wants to use it when they are looking for a print job or what have you. But we also try and make ourselves available as well. We do have we have a nationwide database that we can also search. So if folks aren't finding someone or they just want a list of people, they can come to us. So a big part of that is really us getting out and doing presentations like this and to departments and making sure that folks are aware of those resources. So it's an ongoing, it's a work in progress, as decentralized as the university is.
Thank you.
Yep, go ahead.
Thank you for that. And I did go on your website and put in print. And so a large list did come out, so it's very easy to use. So then on one of your slides, and it's page 95 in our packet, 5% of total spend. Is that good? Is that what you might expect, or is it, I mean, where does that fall in comparison to expectation maybe or other universities?
Hips and Regent Davenport. So I believe what you're talking about is this one about doing business with Minnesotans. So that is specific to Minnesota-based targeted businesses. And that number, that is something that we only recently started tracking. So we're working on benchmarking there. So we're happy with it as a baseline for us, and we are very, very interested in growing that.
Very good. Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up? That's 5% of the total budget, which includes everything, right? Wages and that 174 million. So, I mean, so 5% of what's left is probably 174 million is probably a pretty good number of what's.
Associate Vice President Volin might have a response.
He's shaking his head.
He's shaking his head.
Yeah. Chair Hips, members of the committee, the total amount that's based on is not the entire budget of the university. It does not include salaries and benefits. It's really what we would call the goods and services spend, and I think that is noted on another page. That's around $600 million.
So it's a pretty high percentage of that, then that's good. Okay, thank you for the clarification. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation and kind of giving us an insight to something I think that's new to a lot of us. As Regent Davenport, your question about, how could someone know about this? It kind of got me thinking about, as we move to kind of centralize and streamline some of our practices. I don't know too much about our procurement and if that's in scope for, say, peak or something like that. But when things are streamlined, you can kind of embed this in the process if it's consistent. But if people are all kind of, putting bids independently and things like that, that's where this might be missed. And I'm seeing a lot of nodding. So that's positive. My question, and there's a chance you're the wrong people to ask, but it's great that this room's always filled with the right people somewhere. But as we're talking about suppliers, kind of got me thinking, okay, this is a specific area of suppliers we're looking at, but then more broadly with the rest of our suppliers, do we have somewhere, and again, maybe it's not your group, do we have a group that's looking at the supplier practices, whether it's labor practices, environmental, and things like that? Is that up to each unit, or do we have something centrally that kind of looks at that?
You mean in terms of whether they or how they're complying with the same goal?
Well, that, but also just okay, a unit is looking to engage with a supplier. How do we make sure that that supplier across their practices is consistent with the kind of values, whether it's labor, whether it's environmental practices, or things like that?
I think the Associate Vice President for Finance can ask.
I said I love this room. They're usually here.
Yes, even though I'm not in the room, I'm available. So vendors that want to do business with the university have to comply with a variety of requirements that we establish, as well as the state and federal government. Quite frankly, if you're going to do business with federal funds, you have a very long list of practices that you have to comply with. And so we incorporate that all into our purchasing practices to make sure that when we have vendors who are applying, first of all, we know that they're complying with all, or when they're applying for a position or for a contract, we know that they comply with the requirements, but also the way we construct the RFP and the questions that we ask them, if an RFP needs to be done, is a really big source of making sure that we're getting the vendors that we want and we get the answers we need.
Thank you, Vice President. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it does, and I think I assume that was happening, and it's good to hear it is. I wonder if going forward, there's even a conversation about, okay, there's the compliance level, but then beyond that, can we, in our inventory, score vendors on, okay, this vendor's carbon neutral, somehow, and then that is actually factored in to the RFP process, and that might kind of, tilt us that way versus another, but thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, first of all, thank you, Chair Hips, and thank you all for your presentation. This is really important work. I mean, there are many, many levers by which we can advance equity, right? We can do it with the student basis, the students we serve. We can do it with the employees that we have. We can do it on services we purchase or things we invest in. And so this is really an important part of that holistic way to advance equity, so I appreciate it. And all that you've done and the work that you've done and 10,000 plus views on the directory. So somebody's looking anyway. Wondering if you anticipate being able to juice that in the future a bit. Like, for example, having a target, that's set, so an achievement goal. So now you know your baseline. Do you have an achievement goal? And is there a way to align incentives? So with the distributed purchasing power of the university, that people can be incentivized to reach some of those goals?
Chair Hibsch and Vice Chair Wheeler. Yes, so we absolutely are, part of our strategic plan in this restructuring, we got additional resources and additional staff. And so we have really big plans. We have a strategic work plan that we're working through. It's multi-year and is very ambitious, and I'm really optimistic about where we're headed at the moment. And so we are definitely looking at additional programming as well that will hit some of our areas that we're looking to expand our engagement with certain categories of targeted businesses. We do also have an incentive program that we've revived. It went on sort of a COVID hiatus, but we do have a program, the Awards Incentive and Recognition Program, where we will offer at the expo that Manager Whithume had mentioned, we honor those departments that spend well with targeted businesses with a monetary incentive. And for discretionary spend for their department, they can throw a big pizza party, they can do whatever they want with that money, invest it back into DEI, and other kinds of recognition that we do within that program. So we have some of that, but as we pick up the pace, we're really excited about expanding that even further and really doing more than what this program has ever done in the past.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Chair Marion.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. I'm trying to marry what you're doing, and then I was when I was going through the board materials last week, looking, as we looked at the consent agenda where we list a variety of items that we're being asked to approve, for whether it's purchase of goods and services over $1 million, and let me just focus on that. And sometimes the description will say, well, there's an RFP involved, and it will say that none were targeted businesses. That X number of suppliers responded and none were targeted businesses. And other times we may say there was no RFP issued at all and gave rationale for continuing with the existing relationship that we already had. So, you know, particularly I'm thinking that when we're doing RFPs, that these are bigger size, can be bigger size contracts. And if we don't have any targeted businesses responding, that's of concern to me. I don't know what efforts went into to try and get them to respond. There are other descriptions here where it said there was an RFP, there were 2 targeted businesses that responded, but the notation is, you can tell from the notation, they weren't one of the ones selected. So I assume it's because ultimately whatever it is they proposed, it wasn't as competitive as a non-targeted business. So my question is, are there things that we could be doing to beef up what as we go into these contracts to, and particularly the larger ones, to make sure that targeted businesses are responding? And I'm sure they're getting a fair shake when they're in there. I'm going to assume that, unless somebody says they're not, which I'm assuming that's not going to be said because it's not done. But I don't know if there's anything we can do at that point to suggest what that is they need to do to be more competitive so that ultimately they are selected. But I'm seeing within our own purchasing, we're losing opportunities with targeted businesses. So an observation, but a question as well, I guess.
Go ahead.
Chair Hipsch and Regent Myron. So we have supplier diversity is typically about 10% of the total evaluation on each of the RFPs that goes out, and that number sometimes is 5, and sometimes there are exceptions where supplier diversity is not a component. But largely what we see is that it's about 10% of that evaluation matrix, and there are all the other elements, cost and performance and qualifications, that factor into who is ultimately awarded those contracts. And I think, there are certain, a lot of our targeted businesses are largely small. And so $1 million contract might not really be within their capacity. Some of these larger ones are not necessarily something they can bid on directly. So we work on trying to facilitate those relationships so that they can be a subcontractor or a supplier under that contract where they would be part of it and the university's dollars go towards that. And that is something that we track. So that's included in all the numbers that you see here, subcontracting dollars as well. So that's one way that we try and do that, and we encourage our targeted businesses to sign up in MBID, the e-sourcing portal, so they're aware of what opportunities are out there, and then they can see which vendors are, if they want just a piece of that RFP, they can see what vendors are bidding on it, and they can connect with those bidders and try and become part of that contract. If we have a non-targeted business that wants to bring in a targeted business as a subcontractor or a supplier, they can also earn those supplier diversity points on that attribute in the evaluation. So it really depends a little bit on the industry as well, who's available in the marketplace to do that. When we're purchasing an MRI machine, there probably are not any or many targeted businesses that can compete for something like that, that could do that work, that own a facility that would build something like that. So it's really industry specific, but I agree with you that there's really a lot of room for us to grow and look at the nuances of each of those RFPs and those contracts and do more targeted outreach.
Very good. Thank you. And thank you all for your presentation. Very, very, very thoughtful. So
Thank you.
okay. And that brings us to the consent report. Senior Vice President Franz, will you summarize the items in today's consent report?
Yes, Mr. Chair, this is where the fun really begins. Because we are consenting to a number of things. So let me first of all start by describing some of the what's under the consent agenda. We've got 8 purchases of goods and services. We have some amendments to our retirement plans, 1 real estate transaction, 4 schematic designs, and an off-cycle tuition rate change for your approval. I'd like to talk about a couple of the key purchases, not all of them. The first one I'd like to mention is a contract with Clifton Larson Allen for an estimated $2.7 million for external audit services. Now, as noted in your docket materials, the proposed engagement with Clifton Larson Allen as the university's external auditor is contingent upon the approval by the board tomorrow of the Audit and Compliance Committee's recommendation to appoint them as the university's external auditor. The next thing I'd like to highlight is we have a new beverage and sponsorship agreement with Coca-Cola of North America. Our current agreement with Coca-Cola is set to expire in June of 2024. This proposed contract is a result of a request for proposal. It was issued in June of this year, followed by an extensive system-wide consultation process. The estimated value of the agreement is $55 million over the 15-year period of July 1, 2024 through June 2039, which is good news for you Coca-Cola drinkers. Today, we also bring for your approval amendments to our retirement plans. We have 3 in front of you today: the faculty retirement plan, the optional retirement plan, and the 457 deferred compensation plan. The goal of these changes is to enhance retirement benefits in line with regulatory updates. Just, I think it was last year, President Biden signed the Secure 2.0 Act, and these changes are to align with that. And for those of you wondering what secure means, it's the name of the act is Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement, which, of course, we all knew that. Next, we have the real estate transaction as we continue acquisition of acreage in Mower County for the future of advanced agricultural research in Minnesota, or the Farm Project. This is a 156-acre parcel that is central to the strategy of 1,600 acres in total for the farm program. We have 4 schematic designs for your approval. These are both across Duluth and Twin Cities campuses: the Veterinary Diagnostic Lab, the renovation of Middlebrook Dining Hall, Territorial Hall, HVAC replacement, and a renovation of the main production kitchen, which serves a residence dining center on the UMD campus. And lastly, on the consent calendar, we have an off-cycle tuition rate change for your approval. Now, this request is per our standard practice of submitting off-cycle tuition adjustment proposals in December for those programs with academic years that start with the summer term. The request today is from the Master of Science in Finance program. The proposed 2.8% tuition rate increase enables this program to remain competitive in light of very strong demand for that degree. The proposed rate increase will not impact current students, as this increase is set to begin in the summer of 2024, and this is a 1-year post-baccalaureate program. And that concludes my remarks on the consent report.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. I want to make a quick note about one of the items in the consent agenda. As you just heard, the consent report includes a contract to engage Clifton Larson Allen as the university's new external auditor. As required by board policy, the Audit and Compliance Committee is charged with recommending the appointment of the external auditor. Given that the Finance and Operations Committee action today will be before the board can take up the Audit and Compliance recommendation tomorrow, this purchase will be contingent upon the board's approval of that recommendation. To outline the committee's recommendation for those of us that were not at the meeting this morning, I'll invite Regent Farnsworth to summarize it now. Regent Farnsworth?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. Earlier this morning, the Audit and Compliance Committee voted unanimously to recommend to the board the appointment of Clifton Larson Allen LLP as the university's external auditor. With our current contract with Deloitte coming to an end, the administration conducted a request for proposal for a new external auditor. 7 firms responded to the RFP, 3 of which were interviewed by an RFP evaluation committee. That review committee unanimously recommended Clifton Larson Allen, often referred to as CLA, which is going to be hard in our venue here, as the finalist. Vice Chair Gully and I, along with other senior leaders, had an opportunity to visit with Clifton Larson Allen prior to this morning's audit and compliance discussion. Both from that meeting and as shown by the committee's recommendation today, we are confident that Clifton Larson Allen will provide the university with excellent service in their new role as our external auditor pending the board's final approval tomorrow. One thing I will add is among the many things that we feel they bring to the table, one of the things that stuck out in Regent Gully and I's conversation with him was a unique support to the governance around audit and compliance. They really spoke to us in our governance function as opposed to a lot of the work that's done with auditing with the administration, which is obvious, but really spoke to us as board members and seemed to be equipped with professional development and other things that really speak to what all we're supposed to be doing with the audit and compliance function. So thank you, Chair Hipsch. Looking forward to more discussion tomorrow.
Thank you. Now, before I invite a motion to approve the consent report, you are welcome to ask questions, make comments, or ask for an item to be separated out from the report to be voted on separately. Are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate an item out?
I have a question.
Yes. Regent Mayeron.
Thank you. Just as a point of order, the way in talking about the engagement with Clifton Larson and Allen, CLA, why is it that this finance committee can't take up that right now, given we are make up the entire board and we have the ability to act as the entire board here in the finance committee and not have to take it to the board? So I'm wondering whether we could act on this today. Is there any reason we can't act on it today as part of our finance committee activities here, as opposed to putting it off for tomorrow for the board?
I'm going to ask Jason.
That's what I assumed. You call a friend.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayron, when the board amended Board of Regents policy, reservation delegation of authority, and Board of Regents policy, board operations and agenda guidelines, it gave the mission fulfillment and the finance and operations the ability to act on behalf of the board within the committee's current portfolios. So since the engagement of the external auditor is currently delegated that sort of recommendation to the Audit and Compliance Committee, it is not within the purview of the Finance and Operations Committee now to sort of pull that over and act on it. It's only to the board. So we will have to wait till tomorrow. At least that would be my advice to the committee.
I would certainly take our advice from the master of the fact that he can say that whole policy name without looking down, it really says a lot about Mr. Langworthy.
I told you this was going to be fun today.
So much fun.
That was very fun.
I certainly accept the explanation.
Are there any other questions or comments, or does anybody want an item taken out? Okay, hearing none, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the consent report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Motion passes. Okay. And now that brings us to the information item. Senior Vice President Franz, anything to highlight?
Yes. There are 7 items. I'm not going to talk about all 7. I just want to draw your attention to a couple of them. For the Central Reserve's general contingency, we do not have any transactions to report. There's an update that you would find interesting about the Debt Management Advisory Committee council meetings. We do have an intent to dispose of property of 286 acres at Umore Park. I think that notice is important in your docket to review. But I'd like to spend just a little bit of time highlighting some of the ongoing progress of our system-wide strategic plan. Tomorrow, Interim President Ettinger and Provost Croson will present a more robust review of the University Performance and Accountability Report and Update on Impact 2025. Today, I just want to point out 4 items that are included in your packet today that really relate to our finance objectives. And the first one is about innovative financing to support long-term strategic objectives. You'll see that in 23, we've done several things where the board approved the use of over $328 million of the proceeds from the $500 million sale of bonds for projects around the university. That was an important item. We also had the the board approved the resolution to issue and sale of debt for the purpose of refunding existing debt, which looks like it may be an opportune time for us in the future, so we appreciate that. And this September, you approved use of the UMOR Legacy Fund to finance farm project acquisitions and development, so we will be moving forward with that. The second item I wanted to highlight is the enterprise risk management, and that's been run through the Audit and Compliance Committee, and they've been reporting on that, hearing reports and moving that along really very well. We're very proud of that. I think we're going to come before the board in May with an official update or somewhere along in there, if that's right. So that's an important project we're working on. The third one is the University of Minnesota safety plans. So we presented the first one back in 2021. We continue to update that. We'll be updating this plan and be sharing with the board for the 2023 updates very soon. Tomorrow, Interim President Jeff Ettinger and myself will give you an update on public safety, but there's some good information there about our safety plans. And the last one I want to mention is our land retention, acquisition, and use strategy, and also our climate action plans. It's imperative for us to maintain our real estate strategy that's really supporting the university's mission in a manner that recognizes our long-term vision and fiscal responsibility. We are just this last year, in April 2023, some of you will remember, we approved a proposal to lease East Cliff to the state of Minnesota as a temporary residence for the governor. So another action item that we took on to make the use of our property strategic, and we think that has been a great opportunity. One of the things we also did in May of 2023, Chief Sustainability Officer Shane Stennis and Professor Heidi Roop presented some climate change impacts and considerations, and we're also working on updates. So you will see a strategic property update in May of 2024. You'll see the update on climate action plans in February 2024, and in June of 2024, you'll see a draft of the Rochester campus plan. So there are a lot of things happening in this area that will be coming your way very soon. We're really proud of the accomplishments the team has engaged here. And that is the last item I wanted to mention, but I did want to end on a very happy and fun note. And that is that for those of you who have been following, we have the university has selected Andrew Parks to succeed Stuart Mason as a chief investment officer. We are proud of the work that Stuart Mason has done these many years, done a tremendous job for the university. Andrew Parks has been working for him for, I think, almost 7 years or so, and an extremely talented person. We're excited about this change. The transfer will occur in the first of the year, and we're very happy. Congratulations to Andrew, and good work to Stuart. We're planning an appropriate opportunity to thank Stuart more after the first of the year. So that concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Franz. Any discussion or questions for? Okay. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned. Thank you, everyone.